Hello, and welcome to Southeast Asia Talks from the China Global South Project. I'm Edwin Srivimo. Today we are diving to a big, complicated issues that's reshaping economies, communities across Southeast Asia and Africa. It's all about nickel and critical minerals and the rush to mine and to process them as demand for electric vehicles and batteries and stainless steel takes off in the world. But there is a tougher story behind headlines about green tech and about the global market. This is about this is stories about land, stories about people, stories about environment, and stories about power. We're asking what's happening on the ground when mining comes to town or to villages, and how are communities, especially indigenous people, being affected or perhaps being left behind? We'll also look at the growing role of Chinese companies in this space and how that's playing out in places like Indonesia and Zimbabwe. To help us unpack it all, we've got one brilliant guest. First up, Muhammad Amin from Walhi South Sulawesi, one of Indonesia's leading environmental watchdogs. Their field work and advocacy on the ground are state of the art and respected by friends and foes alike. They are all about fact based. This guy, Al Amin, spent years working directly on policies, advocacies, and research in the field and has seen firsthand what a bad or weak policies as well as a lack of capacity to implement policy and enforce safeguards mean for people on the ground, for environment on the ground, and on land rights and on the social aspect and particularly on the environment. And also with us, Obert Bore, Critical Minerals Editor here at the China Global South Project. He's a legal analyst who spent years following Chinese investment in Africa with a sharp eye, like an eagle, on trade, policy, and human rights. Together, we will explore where the cracks are, how promises on ESG and community protection are holding up, and what both regions can learn from each other. So, Obert and Amin, please share your experiences and stories. And if you guys can also ask questions to each other. This is a talks. This is a discussion. We can ask questions to each other and share experiences. So let's get started. Amin, your work focus on the ground on advocacy, on monitoring. On the ground, the activities of mining and smelting of critical minerals, in this case in Sulawesi, nickel. The companies who are operating in Sulawesi mostly are Chinese companies. So can you tell us your experience and perhaps your work's experiences and your organization's experiences in this field, in monitoring, in researching these mining and smelting operations? Okay, let's get started. Amin, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Edwin, for excellent opportunity for us, so I can share with the public, with the China Global South audience about the China investment in critical mineral issues in Sulawesi, in my islands. Now I'm working for Walhi South Sulawesi, and also I am the coordinator of Sulawesi Alliance, Sulawesi Alliance. It's this coalition or alliance work for monitoring smelting and nickel mining expansion in Sulawesi. So I'm very glad if I can contribute in this conversation, right? So for the first time, I am working for monitoring nickel mining and smelting expansion in Sulawesi when the former president of Joko Widodo announced that Indonesia wants to be the main actor or main player in supplying nickel commodity for the global market. Yeah. So after that, we see that the nickel mining expansion very strong and very massive, and we worried that we will get the big impact, especially for the environment and people livelihood. So because of that, we and I especially and personality began to monitor of China investment operation in Sulawesi, and the result is many impacts that we see and that we find because of according to me, China investment or China companies didn't use their environmental and social policy on safeguard policy, but they use or implement Indonesia policy, especially for protecting environment and social. So the people have to know that Indonesia regulation or Indonesian policy of social and environment safeguard is very weak. So if China company use Indonesia policy, so it's same that it is similar that China will give environmental and social impact in their operation, in their mining and smelting operation. So the reality and the real situation in the field that that pollution to the river until to the coast, also land acquisition, and also the worker safety and worker problem. Yeah, but I'm more focused on the environment and social impact. That's where the pollution, the flood happened after nickel mining and nickel smelting operated in Indonesia, in Sulawesi. So cutting tree, many impact, but the problem is, I think there is no effort from the company to resolve and to restore the problem. So it is the reality of the impact of the nickel smelting and mining impact in Sulawesi, especially I think there are two provinces in Sulawesi that where China is very China investment or China company operating their investment, their smelter, their factory to process nickel and supply global demand in the world.
Yeah, good question. So mostly your organization's experience and monitoring that you led focus on the environment. And in these two provinces in Sulawesi. Sulawesi is an island in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia. On the map, it looks pretty funny. It's like a K, but with it's like a K, the island. It's a huge island. So many natural resources there. It's just beside Borneo and sitting in between Borneo and Maluku in Southeast Asia, part of the Republic of Indonesia. And Amin now is in Makassar, central Indonesia, I'm in Jakarta, Western Indonesia, and Obert is in Harare. So, okay, this is pretty cosmopolitan. Okay, what are your key takeaways from the Chinese company's operations in regards to the environment uh, in Sulawesi, in the provinces that you monitor?
A lot. So you know that the concession of nickel mining in Sulawesi putting in the or there in the essential ecosystem in Sulawesi. For example, in the forest, that, and then forest of Sulawesi is very essential and also very rich of the
This is
biodiversity.
rainforest.
So if you can, yes, because this is the Sulawesi rainforest is very unique, also is very essential, especially for the uh, endemic habitat of Sulawesi flora and fauna, right? So we found that after many company get the concession from Indonesia government, they extract and mine the forest, they cut the trees, and also they destroy the land to take nickel deposit and bring to the smelter, right? So Indonesia has many essential biodiversity and also endemic biodiversity like anoa, maleo bird. Now the anoa and the maleo bird didn't have habitat or home for life. So that's why we very strong to make sure that and ask the government to moratorium or to stop nickel mining expansion to Sulawesi because the impact very harbor and very huge. Yeah. The second one about the pollution, especially the tiling and the ex-mining impact of mining pollution. So we see the impact of or the environmental impact caused by the nickel mining and smelter is very also huge and extreme. Yeah. For example, many rivers in Sulawesi damaged, and the water is changed of the color because of the sedimentation of nickel mining, because of the nickel mining. Before nickel mining come or nickel mining operate, the water is very good. Many people use the water for the life, for the cook, for many things. But because of after nickel mining operate in the area, in the location, many people didn't use again the water from the river because of the color is changed. The color become the brown because of the sedimentation. Yeah. So even the color of the river also until to the river, to bring to the coast. So you can imagine that the many essential ecosystem broke and damaged because of the nickel mining. So that's why we urge the government and China government also to carefully and to very focus also about the to protect the environmental impact.
I wanted to get your sense. I mean, in terms of the environmental impacts you see from Chinese, financed projects in nickel. Do you see the same, impacts in other projects that are not funded by Chinese companies? If any the Western companies that are also investing in the nickel mining and refining in Indonesia, do you see the same impacts, or the impacts are more pronounced when we start talking about Chinese companies?
I think the impacts, there are several impacts is same, that's same, but they are also different. Yeah, the different things between Western company and China company in Sulawesi, I see from the operation or from the smelting methodology or methodology. For example, in Western company, the mining and the smelting is integrated each other. Yeah. For example, they have huge and large concession of 70,000 hectares. From this concession, they built power plant, they built sediment pond, they built to manage pollution, to manage the sedimentation, also to build the smelter or factory. Yeah. But in China, company is different because Indonesia government just gave them permission to build factory, to build smelter or industry area, and they also give many companies, local or also foreign company like China company, concession to mine the nickel. Yeah. So the nickel mine, they bring or they sell to the nickel smelter, and the China smelter or China industry not involving or not responsible to the impact from the nickel mining, right? So I hope you can understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Because they just build and operate the industry without has a nickel mining concession. So, but I mean, I think that China industry also has to responsible to the nickel mine because they buy nickel ore from the nickel mining from the outside of their investment. But in the reality in the field, China company didn't responsible to the impact of from the nickel mining. So that's the difference. And the second one, the other one that because of China has limited or they have huge area, but many company also build the factory there. So they didn't have management to manage. They don't have a strategy to manage the pollution. So that's why. So for example, tiling pollution or coal pollution. They bring or they put to the sea, and they don't have a strategy to manage the pollution. So that's why I think the problem in the problem between the Western company with the China company.
So, I mean, are you saying that, okay, in companies other than Chinese, wherever they fall. Usually they are integrated, the mining and the smelting and all the process in between, including managing the waste. The when they the sediment pond and etc. The management of waste. But in the case of the Chinese investment, they only operate for smelting aspect of it, and their locations are centralized in this business area, so that the they don't adhere to the regulations where they have to have this pollution and waste management. That's that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, yeah. They collaborate with the other company to get the nickel ore, or they get the nickel source. Yeah. However, it between the nickel processing with the nickel mining is different company, but they join operation, like they maybe assign the MOU to supply each other. However, China or industry didn't have a responsible, or didn't have to responsible to minimize the impact of from the nickel mining. But according to me, it is relevant because the companies who supply nickel ore to China industry, also the impact has also the response. I mean, the impact is also part of China operation or China investment. So they say it's not my responsible, and etc. So it's the reality of the situation in the field, especially in Sulawesi.
Yeah, I want to come to the issue of managing the impacts of refining nickel. I understand that the impacts of mining are quite different from the impact of processing or smelting and refining. Given that smelting and refining, obviously there is need for energy and water consumption is quite intensive. And seeing that in Indonesia, from an African and a lot of African governments, they often cite Indonesia as a best practice or example, a model that can copy in terms of trying to move up the value chain, and produce products, not necessarily export critical minerals that are just ore, but refined. And now the question is, when Indonesia banned the export of raw nickel, was there any corresponding environmental regulations that was created to respond to the new impacts that come with processing and refining that nickel? Or you were still sitting with the old, piece of environmental regulations that, ordinarily, I think would not necessarily comprehensively cover those impacts. And my question is also coming from the fact that when Zimbabwe did ban its export of raw lithium, we did not see a corresponding environmental regulations to manage that, because that comes also with its own, tailings management regulations, etc. Very different from the impacts of mining. So what is it? Maybe you can share a bit more of if this is something that was done in Indonesia, or you still have the same old environmental regulations that apply to mining, which should now apply to refining of nickel.
Yeah, I think also that there is or there are many different between regulation, between outside or maybe like international regulation with Indonesia regulation, especially about the pollution management and environmental standard, environmental and environmental standard. For example, now in Indonesia is being viral, or is being viral issues about the water contamination of hexafluorine chromium. It is also the difference between other policy, like Indonesia implement, or Indonesia Indonesia regulation about environmental standard, especially for the water quality. They implement. Indonesian standard is 0.05 milliliter of hexafluorine, yeah. But in international level, I think they have in Indonesian standard is very weak. So if China, if they implement a China standard, I think the impact will not happen like right now. Yeah.
So the environmental standard and safeguard in Indonesia is not yet keeping up with the impact of the operations. So the standards are still low, and the operations got bigger and more intensive, and etc. So the weight of the operations produces this negative impact, and the regulations just couldn't cope in safeguarding this, right? So the impact is now the toxics, the chromium, etc. So is that what you're saying? That's first. Second, yeah, this toxic contamination, is this the same? How do you call it? Elements that are in Erin Brockovich movie?
Yeah.
That's
It's
very
the same
poisonous.
with
That's very
in
toxic.
the movie. Yeah.
Okay. So Obert, so the regulations couldn't keep up. They already have, but compared to the weight of the present time, it's too weak.
Yeah. I think it's no, I don't know how to put it, but from where I sit, I thought, of course, policymakers should not be thinking about just moving up the value chain. They should have an approach where they consider, what does that mean in terms of impacts? We know mining has got impacts if it's open cast, environmental degradation. All these impacts are well documented. They are well known. But if you are introducing, infrastructure facilities that are going to process critical minerals, and what that means in terms of other resources required, like water and energy, what is the impact to the resources? If I'll share a little bit about Zimbabwe in the lithium, where a lot of impacts have been noted, particularly because in Zimbabwe, lithium is also found in very dry regions of the country. So those are region 5 and 6. Our country is divided into 5 regions rather. So region 4 and 5, which are drier parts of the country, that is where you find a lot of the lithium mining happening. That is where the lithium is essentially found. And so these regions are already, water strained, impacts on climate change, obviously contributing to that. But when you add processing of lithium, they say, companies that are processing, when you speak to them, they say the amount of water they need to process 1 ton of lithium is something around like 50,000 liters, which is really significant. If you add or at least consider that this area is water strained, so they have to drill, very, deep boreholes for them to get the water out of the ground and pump their processing facilities. So it's now having ripple impact on the community's access to water. We're not just talking about pollution, we are talking access to the water, because there's now a lot of competition between the companies and the communities to just access the water for communities, livelihoods, their livestock. Most of them are rural communities that are, predominantly live on agriculture, feed off the land. Subsistence agriculture is the main source of, their livelihood. So it's creating some form of competition. That is what we are seeing in Zimbabwe in terms of the impact on water. And from a policy perspective, I was reading around in, I think, Argentina, because Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile are some of the biggest lithium producers in the world. So what they are starting to do around, managing the impacts on water is to introduce what they're calling hydrological impact assessments to become part of the environmental impact assessment. Hydrological impact assessments become quite key, and if they're integrated in the EIA or SCA, the environmental impact assessment, then allows government, before approving projects, to really get an understanding of what is the facility or the processing or the refining going to look like in terms of impact on water. So that's some lessons we are picking up from, Latin America. And, I just wanted to bounce off ideas and get an understanding of what is happening in Indonesia. But for Zimbabwe, we haven't had this discussion on, so how do we improve our environmental regulations to take into account the impact on water? Because all the lithium in Zimbabwe is being mined on regions that are very dry. So talking of the pollution, we are just talking of the access to the water itself, so which is also creating, another layer of challenges. We really hope, policymakers can start asking, or at least thinking about, how do we ensure that moving up the value chain, creates, or at least they are thinking about what are the policy measures they need to put in place to address the impacts that come with moving up the value chain, because it's not going to be the same as the impacts of mining, as you see obviously in Indonesia. Of course, other similar impacts, we also see them in Zimbabwe, where there's a lot of environmental degradation. You talk of displacement, involuntary displacement of communities to pave way for the projects. I could speak of Prospect Lithium, having been in an area that was predominantly used for commercial farms rather, not even subsistence. So there's also impact on food security that we are starting to see, that because there's no land to farm in places like Buhera in the eastern part of the country, where a project that is also financed by BYD has displaced a significant number of communities, and those communities, they were promised land, compensation, and until to date, they still obviously feel that it wasn't fair. They were not legally represented. The company and corporate lawyers, legal minds that were helping them to craft this compensation agreement, whereas the community was not represented. So I think we see a lot of similarities in Indonesia and in Zimbabwe, in many parts of the globe where transitional minerals are being extracted. But what I'm yet to see is governments thinking about what are the impacts of processing, refining, and how our policies responding to that. That is what I think we are yet to see, at least from our part of the world.
Yeah, I think there are similar situation, that that happen in Indonesia. For example, we use we discussing two part, in the highland mining area. So they damage the forest, they mine deep, they mine mining and nickel in deep land, in deep. So that's also that the and community cannot get or cannot access the water as normal as before nickel mining coming, and I think also the in Indonesia there are two weather I mean like a climate, a rain season and dry season. When a dry season, community people in the village didn't or cannot access the water. Meanwhile, in the rain season, community get the flood. So because of the there is no more forest to protect the land from the rain season. So this situation happen in Sulawesi every rain season and every dry season. In the dry season, they didn't get our access. They cannot access the clean water. However, in the rain season, they get the flood. In the sea, and even in the other area, in the like the rice field area, the activity or the production also very become the decrease or getting decreased because the pollution of ice pollution from the factory. There are two factors as pollution to the community. First, because of the nickel processing in factory. The second one about because of the coal power plant, because of the captive coal power plant. So the impact also experience by the people, by the community. In the coastal also, the coastal damage because of the pollution, because of the sedimentation, even because of the river. Because of the stockpile of nickel in the factory. When the rain season, they bring sedimentation to the sea, and now before nickel smelter operation, people or fisher folks can catch a fish in the near from the coast. However, now because of there are many factory and many smelter there, fisher folks has to go far to catch a fish. So this situation, I think, not only because of the pollution, but also about the water access and livelihood problem also coming to the people, experienced by the people, by the community. So I think there is no difference between what happened in the Zimbabwe with Indonesia in Sulawesi today.
So I mean, okay, similar experiences. If I imagine from a POV of common villagers looking at the mining using so much water, and they don't have any access to fresh water for example, in Zimbabwe, that would be devastating. That would be very hurtful for the villagers, right, Robert? And have the government addressed that from regulations, or they just let things happen as it is without any address of the situation? Oh, but in lithium mining, you said that they pump 50,000 liters of water per day or per hour.
No, that's an estimate of the amount of water required to process 1 ton of lithium.
Yeah, and if they pump it from the ground, that much water, and as a villager looking at all those waters, they can be used to fertile the land. They can be used for the people for their daily life and etc. to build other things that directly impact common people. Well, my question is, have the government addressed this through regulations or through safeguards, Albert?
I think from an environmental perspective, one of the tools at the disposal of government is ensuring that those companies that are compliant, that are not compliant with environmental regulations, obviously penalized for that. If I may speak a little bit about this environmental laws being enforced. We have a project that is a lithium mining project and processing, in which Sinomine Resources Group has invested millions of dollars, and that project is one of the projects in which there was a case of water pollution. And so when that happened, the Environmental Management Authority did come in to investigate, and they, confirmed that the water had been polluted. So essentially, it was a dam, which communities relied on for their livelihood, for their farms and etc. So the company was fined $5,000. Can you imagine? Yeah, that's how much they were fined. And if you put that into what is the cost, the environmental cost, or the impact, not just the aquatic life in this water body, but the compounding effect, because communities now can't use that water. They can't use that water for their gardens, or, it's going to affect their soil. Can't use it for livestock, many other purposes they can't, because this water has been polluted, and the environmental authorities did their own test and confirmed that it was polluted. But you find that company 5,000. So to me, obviously, it talks of it's an issue about whether our environmental regulations are deterrent enough. Are they strong enough? Obviously, they are not. But it's because that 5,000, it's actually the highest penalty that any mining company can be penalized for violating environmental law. It's actually the highest in terms of our levels of scale of fines. So it falls within the highest level, which is level 14 in terms of our scales of fines. But that is to be updated every other time. But again, it speaks to the fact that the environmental regulations, they enable pollution to happen, because companies can just, pay that amount and continue, business as usual. They can't feel the impact. It's not even, what's worth the amount of money that they would get after selling just one ton of lithium. They can just pay that enough. So for me, it's about whether the environmental regulations are responsive enough to the cost of this, extraction of critical minerals. And we don't have that. Then coming to the issue you mentioned earlier on what government is doing around water. I think we haven't done much. At least I have not seen much. What the government has been doing rather is for companies, if they say we do not have enough resources to process the lithium, either energy or water, they are allowed. So there is a waiver to export the lithium unprocessed because the water is not there, or the water is not sufficient, the energy is not sufficient. So there's a waiver to export the lithium in raw form. But when the lithium is exported in raw form, there's a tax that they pay for unprocessed or unbeneficiated lithium being exported. I think it should be around 5%, if I'm not mistaken. So companies can still go ahead and export unprocessed lithium, but there's a tax for paying for not processing. If in this case we are talking about the water is not there, the energy is not there, so how do we do business? How do we continue to run our operations? The government says you can continue to export, but we are going to fine you a higher tax, which they're calling a non-beneficiate or unprocessing of lithium tax, if you may like. So that's what is currently happening. Of course, some companies do export concentrate, which is just merely crushing the ore, floating it, pumping it into their plants and removing all the dirt, and export something that is much more cleaner. So that's what is happening. So because the water is really a challenge in many parts of the country, water is a key challenge for Zimbabwe in lithium mining and processing. I wanted to just say there are other areas where Tsingshan project at Tsingshan, which essentially is also in a lot of nickel mining there in Indonesia. They have a project in Zimbabwe where they've literally drilled their boreholes in a dam that had dried up. So this just points and paint a picture of how much water is quite in a crisis, that a major community dam that supplied them with water, it dried. So
You're talking about dam.
a dam, yes.
They bore it
So
until it's empty?
So it's dry because of it's climate change and many other, it had dried up. So essentially it's a dam that is nothing, that is no water. And the company went there to drill the boreholes to pump the processing of lithium. After drilling, they drilled this borehole, essentially about 7, I think, holes were drilled in that dam that had dried up. So this just paints, or at least tries to show you, how water is quite a challenge for a lot of them, and how it's also affecting their livestock, affecting their, livelihood, essentially.
Yeah, the most basic things, the most basic needs of human, water. Yeah. Oh, so okay. So you're saying that
And water is a right now. In terms of both international law, in terms of our local laws that do recognize water is a fundamental human right in terms of the Constitution of Zimbabwe.
Yeah. So you're saying that the regulations,
but of course, there is responsibility to.
So you're saying that the regulation is not up to date with the current situation, so that the most severe penalty is only $5,000. So the state, basically, the state needs to update that to current situation. Also, other state governments, etc., and with the lack of enforcement or maybe weak enforcement that caused this. Okay, Amin, do you have any questions to Obert?
Yeah, Obert. I just wondering about the information, right? Yeah. I think you can explain many things about the impact, and you can monitor very well things on operation in your country or in your area, because maybe you have information and you can compare with the real situation in the field. In Indonesia, as long as my experience to monitor China or Tsingshan companies in China or Xinjiang operation in Sulawesi, we never see the environmental impact assessment document. Also, the community that we work together never see the environmental impact assessment document and environmental monitoring document every year. Yeah, because I know that in Indonesia government asks a company to report about environmental condition every year. However, we community in the field never read the document of environmental of the company. That's why also we cannot explain very well like you before, because we just see the in the cover, right? That we can know, then we can see directly in the situation. Like for example, as I explained before, water contamination, water pollution from the sedimentation, the water color change to be brown because of the sedimentation. That's why also community cannot access water from the river anymore. Yeah. But the big problem also because we never understand or we never know that how company protect the environment, how the company manage the pollution, manage the waste. So it is also the big problem in Indonesia, in Sulawesi, because no transparency, no disclose information. So how in your country, how in Zimbabwe is Xinjiang company transparent on into the people or not, or what? How you can how community in Zimbabwe can understand about the environmental management of the company?
Thanks. So in Zimbabwe, I think more or less we also have a challenge with transparency and accountability, access to information, access to environmental information, particularly these environmental impact assessment reports. So how it happens in Zimbabwe, I think it's quite different. In other parts of the world, in other countries, the Environmental Management Agency, they are part of the environmental impact assessment process in actually undertaking that and, coming up with the report. Whereas in Zimbabwe, what happens is that mining companies, they hire private external consultants who do the environmental impact assessment. So they do the whole consultations with the different stakeholders. And once the consultants are done with the report or with the consultations, they produce a report which again goes to the Environmental Management Authority. If the Environmental Management Authority is happy with the impacts as documented, as laid out in the report, and also if they are happy with the plan, because it also comes with the environmental management plan. If they are happy with the plan, then they'll approve the project and give it a certificate to go ahead. And in our environmental management regulations for the longest time, it was not possible to access environmental impact assessment reports through that regulation. It essentially only allowed, if you are an interested stakeholder, it only allowed you to inspect. In other words, you could go to the office of the Environmental Management Authority and say, I have an interest in this project. Can I have a look at their EIA report or SCR report? and you're allowed to get, just inspect the report and not take out the copies of the report so that you can go out during your free time and study it. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to, read and comprehend the whole report in their office. You need more time, or you probably also need other experts to help you interpret certain things, in the report. But however, Zimbabwe came up with a new law in 2021. This law is called Freedom of Information Act. So the Freedom of Information Act allows essentially Zimbabweans to access government information or information that is in the possession of government institutions, particularly even public, commercial entities that are owned by the government. So where government is state-owned company, it's possible through this law to now access the EIA report. So we have accessed communities in Zimbabwe. We have started to understand through a lot of work that civil society organizations are doing. They've started to write information requests using that law. So you write to the authority to say, I have an interest in this project. I'm a committee member. Can I have access to that report? I can talk of the Tsingsan project I mentioned earlier on. I've looked at their EIA report, which, was accessed through this Freedom of Information law. So there have been some improvements to access environmental information in Zimbabwe. But of course, it's not always easy. It's not always, straightforward. Obviously, a lot of community members where most projects happen don't know these, environmental laws or these access to information laws. So it's more of civil society organizations doing that work and writing to authorities. Of course, the information is not released as civil society or communities would want. Sometimes there's a lot of back and forth before the information can be accessed, can be released. But even the interpretation, I think the knowledge to understand those reports is also very low to say what exactly is being said in this report. Then the other thing is about how the consultant who undertake the environmental impact assessment undertake the consultations. A lot of times it's the local authority leaders or government leaders that leaders at the local authority level that are often consulted, most of them politically aligned with government, and not necessarily the communities themselves who are directly to be impacted by the project. So a lot of the projects you hear that we were never consulted, but the project is already going on. And if you go to look at the EIA report, it will have the names of the people that were consulted. It's actually a requirement before the Environmental Management Authority approves. They also look at who was consulted. So most of the time, it's usually the politically appointed leaders that are consulted by the companies to get the project approved. And also the Environmental Management Authority actually is not funded. So they get a fee for approving a project. So it's also in their best interest that they allow a project to go ahead, despite the negative environmental impacts that they might be stated in that report. Then the last bit I want to add is the EIA reports that I've looked at personally. I note that a lot of companies they understate in other ways they downplay and water down the environmental impacts, particularly to this water issue, to say how is the processing facility, because it's also required to undertake the EIA for building a processing plant. You need an EIA having been done. So they don't, comprehensively disclose in the report how the project is going to impact the environment. So common things you find is things like there's going to be dust pollution, and how do we manage? They will say we are going to be, coming up with big, huge trucks to, suppress the dust with water. They'll talk of, things like blasting and how they are going to do with that. But the issue of water is really something that we often see being downplayed. It's not really coming out in the EIA or environmental impact assessment reports. Yeah. Let me end here. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's pretty complicated, but mostly in general, it's about the regulation, the host country, whether they have whether they are equipped with the regulations, the capacity to enforce it, and the willingness to enforce those regulations and safeguards. Because investment come to a country and they are a business. They are obliged to adhere to the local regulations, and if the local regulations are weak, they are not prepared. They only want to take the investment, but not to safeguard the environment or the social aspect of that on the ground. Then this happens, right? This is just oversimplification that are not warranted, but basically that's one of the consequences of not having the proper regulation and not having the capacity to enforce it. That's basically it. So, guys, we have set the 1 hour mark. Shall we continue sharing experience, or do you have anything else to ask Obert? Amin, or Obert, do you have any questions to Amin?
No, yeah, just to appreciate, the time. I know it's past midnight now in Jakarta, but thanks so much for taking the time, out of your busy schedule, but also you should be with your family and resting. We really appreciate the time to exchange ideas, learn lessons, what's happening in Indonesia. As I said earlier on, a lot of African countries that are thinking of moving up the value chain, they refer to Indonesia as one of the, model, if I may put it that way. So it's always good to learn and understand what is happening there. Just last week, Jero and I were attending a conference where a lot of talk from policymakers from Zimbabwe, DRC, Tanzania, Zambia. We're also talking about the same. We see Indonesia as a model, and it's always good to understand what is it that they see in Indonesia that they can try to replicate. So thanks for the time. We really appreciate this, and thanks to you, Edwin, for coordinating this.
Yeah, for me, maybe I need to more monitoring, impact, environmental impact and social impact in Sulawesi, because we see that the even though we see that the impact very huge, very big, especially for the livelihood of community, for the community right, access to water, access to food, access to job, because of many fisher force now cannot get the income because of the cost is already broken. But also I think after I heard from Obert about the environmental and social impact also from the lithium mining and lithium refinery of China investment, I think that Africa and Asia has to consolidate to also to push and to urge China authority, China government to implement extraterritorial obligation to make sure that China investment, China companies implement China policy, especially about the environmental and social safeguard, because I think China is the big country now. Also, China industry implement a social and environmental safeguard policy. However, for in the outside country, for the Indonesia, for the Asia, for the Africa, they give us impact. So I think we has to always communicate to make sure that China also implement their policy, also international standard policy, to reduce, to minimize environmental and social impact in the grassroots. So I hope this connection not only not finishing in this meeting only, but we can also keep in touch to update each other about situation in our community. I also appreciate and thankful for Obert, especially for Bang Edwin, for facilitating this meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, dear listeners and audience, this is important because we are trying to cross-sharing our stories and experience in terms of critical minerals, mining and smelting, etc. So if you have any questions or ideas of topic around this, please just send your ideas to the comment section. What do you want to know about mining in Indonesia? Because we have the experts from the ground, Amin, for example. And if Indonesian or Asian listeners are interested in experiences and stories about the same subject in Africa, in Zimbabwe, just send your topics and we will consider them, and we can discuss it later at a different time. But for sure, very personally, I'm very interested to explore more about the toxic water contamination, the chromium, because that can have a deadly impact for the local communities there. Very, very deadly impact over time, that chromium contamination to fresh water there, because it was consumed by human, by cattle, by the plants, and by kids, by babies, because the water is the source of life everywhere. So, okay, that's it for now with Southeast Asia Talks from the China Global South. I'm Edwin Sribimo. Thank you, Obert Bore in Harare, Zimbabwe. And thank you, Muhammad Al-Amin in Makassar, South Sulawesi. That's it for now. Thank you for listening and watching. Bye-bye.